Hi there. Okay, on today's tutorial I'm going to show you how I would go about painting a nebula scene like this. I'm going to show you all the stages that I go through in order to construct this, and I hope you enjoy following me on that journey. I'd just like to say a massive thank you to those people that have already supported me over on my Patreon page. If you want to know more about that, then please just check the link down in the description. Okay, so rather than take you through the process of how to draw the starry kind of background, I've already done that in this previous tutorial, which is how to paint a galaxy. If you follow the link in the description, go watch how to create the stars in the background, and then come straight back and I'll show you how to do the nebula. So in terms of starting the nebula, the way I'm going to do that is to just get rid of all the layers that I actually created for the benefit of the galaxy. And what I can do then is simply share the artwork as a JPEG and save the image. Then what I can do, if I create another image, I'm going to do another A4 canvas, spin it around. I can then simply insert a flat image from photos, and I've got my image of stars there. So it's on a separate layer from the background. I don't need to colour the background black on this occasion like I did with the previous one. I've already got my stars there. The first thing I'm going to do is create another layer. I want to keep the layer of stars separate. I don't really want to alter them. I want to start on a layer above it, and I've not created a colour palette, I'm just going to sort of find my way as I go along. I think the first kind of colours that I want to start introducing is kind of like a dark blue. So I'm just going to go for the sort of quite rich version. I'm going to go onto my soft brush. I'm going to turn the size sort of a medium size. I'm going to turn the opacity really low. Well, the first thing I need to start making some decisions of is where I want more of the focus to be in the image. So I think I'm going to start putting some blue over to this side of the kind of canvas. And to begin with, I'm not really too bothered about the exact shapes. I'm just starting to get some forms in there. In fact, I've decided that that's way too purpley. I'm going to go more towards the green end, and let's just try that. I think perhaps it's important for you to see my genuine kind of process as I find my way along. Sometimes I'll show you with a preset kind of colour scheme, but sometimes it's useful to see what the actual process is like for me as well when I'm finding my way with it a bit more. So I want it quite a broken texture. I don't want it to be too smooth, so I'm just sort of tapping at the screen a little bit. You're not going to see the individual brush marks anyway because I've got the opacity turned really low. Much of this actual blue colour is likely to be covered up at a later point as well, but it's definitely the first colour I need to lay down first, just to start to build up a sense of where I want to put things. So I'm creating some bigger areas to fill in sort of washes of the colour, if you like, and then I'm using kind of smaller version of the brush, still a low opacity, just to start adding some sort of broken texture in as well by tapping the screen. I'm going to keep this as a separate layer from other areas anyway, so I can always go back to this and add a bit more. The next layers that I'm going to be adding are going to be warmer colours, so I might get some yellows and reds. So although this is not quite the right kind of blue I might want for certain areas, it's going to change when I add some yellow over the top, because obviously blue and yellow makes more of a greeny colour anyway. Now, I'm not specifically copying one image. I have been looking at various images of sort of nebula, so it's a bit of a kind of a mixture of all the kind of things that I've looked at, really taking some of my favourite kind of colours and textures and just sort of seeing what happens if I just start to make up my own version. That's the kind of way that I prefer to work largely. It's important to, well, I feel it's important to actually observe things, but it's not always much fun when you're tied down to one image and just slavishly kind of copy it. So I'm going to go to, I have got some colours here anyway from a previous picture. That happens to be the right kind of colour that I want to use. So I'm going to add some warmer tones to different areas in the sky. So just a little bit of a warmer colour maybe on this side. I don't want it to be too strong at this point anyway. Maybe a bit more creeping in here as well. Okay, I'm going to create another layer. This time I'm going to go to kind of yellowy colours. In fact, I might go for this colour. So it's not quite as strong as the one there, which is a slightly more subdued version of it. I'm going to turn my brush size down. I want to be a bit more careful with the kind of areas that I add in this. So I want a sharp line, but I want it a lot more kind of controlled. So you can see now I'm applying yellow over the top in certain areas. It is changing the look of that blue to be slightly more green, and that's fine. So I want a bit of a focus, a bit of a concentration of the yellow here, maybe in this middle section, and then it kind of fades out either side. Maybe there's another section down here. On that basis, I'm going to go back to the blue. I'm going to add some more of that bluey colour at this underneath section. Again, slightly more to the green. There's no correct shape with this. It's not like you're drawing human anatomy or anything where certain shapes need to be appearing. It's kind of quite abstract, this, really. Although it is depicting something that does exist in the universe, it's still, you know, the shapes of it, the precise forms you can play around with. It's important you use layers for this because, well, not only if you want to change your mind, but you want to be able to play around with the effects on each layer perhaps later on as well, or even sort of duplicate certain elements, erase certain areas of it without necessarily erasing the background. Okay, I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to start using some more kind of orangey red colours. In fact, I'm going to go more red than that, maybe a dark version. I'm going to turn my brush up a little bit. I'm going to start having some reds in this area. So the yellow kind of changes into red over the side. So as I said before, every time I'm adding a layer of something, the stars that are in the background are becoming obscured. So it's fine, I can always create another layer of stars later on, not a problem. But that's something that I'll probably do more towards the end. Okay, I'm going to go back to the yellow layer. I think I want to get a bit braver with some of the yellow now. I'm going to up the strength of it and start to just exaggerate some of the yellows that are going in there. So you're going to get a main sort of section here that then may have little bits that break off it. So you might have some little areas here that are kind of little islands growing off from the main area. I think what I'd also like, as well as the blue that I've got in there, I think I'd quite like some really light colours. So I'm going to go for a very pale blue colour as well. I think I'm just going to, in the background, so remember on one of the real background layers here, adding some areas that are incredibly light as well. And that way, when I do some sort of reds over the top, it's going to really contrast with the white. It's going to look like a sort of darker patch, broken texture over the top of it as well. So I might have some more white over here. Maybe try some other colours like a nice pink. There's no reason why, you know, your image has to be restricted in colours. You can have a whole variety of colours. Just some suggestions of sort of pinker colours coming in over here. In fact, I want to make it slightly stronger, not ridiculous, but just a touch more. Perhaps a slightly more peachy pink, I think, would be better. I guess really what you're aiming for is layers of interest. So there might be one feature that's here that's, you know, and we're talking about distance, we're talking about millions of miles distance between different features perhaps, but, you know, still you're dealing with kind of the same elements of distance. You might work on even something much smaller. There's going to be certain things that apply no matter what the scale. So some things want to be, you know, subtler, want to look as if they're knocked back, a separate element that is different from the foreground features. So you might have some cooler colours to make things look more in the distance, whereas the bright reds and yellows are going to pop out and look more kind of foreground elements. At least that's the effect you're going to get, regardless of whether, you know, the truth of distance is actually that. Remember, this is your universe, literally, so you can say how it works. You can do whatever you want. So I'm going to go back on one of my upper layers. I'm going to go to the red, and I'm really going to start adding some darker reds in now. It's more on the orange actually, but that's fine. It's still sort of in the red area. So I'm going to turn the brush size down a bit on this. I really want to start getting some even darker forms in the middle of the reds there. Building up some nice contrast. And some interesting textures too, and I might even go into some of these areas, and I think I might need a slightly more red version if I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go for an even darker version of it. It's not going to be black, but it's definitely heading in that direction. I'm going to turn the brush down a little bit. If you notice, I'm not really zooming in on this. If I was to take it to a really final finish, like a finished piece, then I probably would zoom in at some point, and I may well do that. And I may share at the end the finished high resolution version. Oops. But for now, so that you understand what I'm doing in the context of the whole picture, I'm really making an effort not to be zooming in and out all the time, because it just gets a bit dizzying to keep watching that. So I really do make an effort with my tutorials just to stay zoomed out so you can see everything that I'm doing in context with everything else. Before I got the Apple Pencil on the iPad Pro, I found that it was pretty much impossible to work like this. I had to keep zooming in. So on the older versions of the older iPads, the iPad Airs, with different less accurate stylus, then it really was difficult to do this zoomed out. I had to zoom in and then get the details, then zoom back out and see what the effect was, then zoom in. And it was possible to work that way, but it's definitely not as straightforward as it is now. So I'm going to start putting in some broken forms here as well. Things are shooting off, fragmenting from the main body of the cloud. I think I'm going to turn the brush opacity up and the size and really start eating away at some of these shapes now. I want this area to be quite dark. So there's not one brush size that I use for too long. I'm constantly swapping and changing the brush size as I go along. Like I say, with something like this where it's really trial and error and you're just experimenting, you just have to be prepared to keep changing the brush size. I'm still using the soft brush, I'm not changing that, but the opacity and the size of the brush is in a constant sort of state of being changed. So I can't do it any one area for an extended period of time without needing to have a change of brush size. It's just the kind of image that requires you to be constantly prepared to try new things. And I'm starting to add some real dark bits now. They're kind of jumping forward from some of the layers of fainter versions of that. But you really need those sort of layers of contrast in order to create that effect. What I'll probably do once I've done some of these is go onto an underneath layer and just start to create a bit of a highlight edge to some of these. It's really going to make it pop out even more. But for now, I'm just still finding my way with some of the shapes. Presumably, you've already watched the Galaxy tutorial, and the Galaxy form was a rather more straightforward image really than this. You could break it down into sort of its elements, although you get different looks of galaxies. This is definitely more trial and error, if you want to create something original anyway. I guess if you were just copying from a photo, then there's definitely certain things you would have to do at certain times, but I'm just experimenting and seeing what happens, so it's a little less straightforward to explain. But I just thought I'd bring you along for the ride so you can share the journey with me. This is the way I really love to work, just sort of winging it as I go along, not really knowing if it's going to be successful, but just trying to think critically as you go along, what's working, what isn't. This is the kind of the way of working that really excites me. Copying from a photo, you may get better results arguably, but you already know what you're going to get at the end of it, so it's just not as interesting, whereas this is definitely more creative from my point of view. So I'm doing a lot of backwards and forwards with this image, so I'm going to go back to the yellow layer. I'm going to go more towards a real white version of that yellow, and I'm just going to start picking out some real sharp kind of edges on some of these. So if you're familiar with kind of photographs of dust, well, clouds of nebula type forms, you'll know already that you do tend to get some really sharp highlights that go around the edge sometimes. So without that, it's not really going to pop and look like the kind of forms that everyone's perhaps familiar with. So I'm just tentatively adding these, so fading it in and out in areas. It's not going to be a solid bold line necessarily. It's going to be built up gradually in areas. So I might have some on the top and underneath. I'm going to go back to a slightly stronger yellow. Turn the opacity down, the brush size up. I think within that, so I'll just fade in that edge a little bit in areas. But that's too lemony yellow. I need to go back to maybe like a slightly more orangey yellow. So as it goes into here, it's almost like it gets lost amongst the clouds, so I'm having it fading out gradually. Probably do the same on this side, so as it approaches the kind of white area here, it gets sort of bleached out and you lose the clear yellow edge to it. So maybe just give it a little bit of a suggestion on some of these edges, but not anything like as strong as there. I'm going to go to some of the real white colours again. In fact, I'm going to go for more of a pink again this time, or of a peachy colour maybe. I'm going to start picking out some of the edges over here as well. In fact, I might create another layer just underneath the red layer, but above the yellow one. Turn the size of the brush way down and just start to create a light edge on some of these forms too. So just like the yellow was feeding into here, I'm now going to start feeding the white over into this area as well a little bit. Just picking up highlights. And there's not an obvious light source for all of this. If you were doing like clouds in a kind of terrestrial sky, you'd know where the sun was, so you'd know where to put all the highlights. But in a kind of nebula forms, then you might get various light sources. There's obviously a concentration of star activity in this area behind here, so you can see just the edges of the cloud is being sort of lit by whatever's going on in here, but then you get more forms over here that are affecting this as well. So it's the same kind of principle that you might get on a typical sky from Earth, but it's less uniform. You might get different things going on in different areas of the actual image, and different colours too. Well, we've got yellow here, we've got pink here. I could even start adding maybe some blue into some areas even. That'd be quite interesting. So maybe perhaps even more of a purpley blue into areas like this. Let's see what that looks like. Some of these kind of forms definitely require a bit of practice to really get your eye into what kind of looks good. So again, I'm creating more kind of layers here of different depths by going over the whole thing in areas just to start to knock back certain areas. All the details that are here are still there, but they've just been knocked back slightly, so it gives a sense of really more of a 3D form of depth. So this whole image is pretty much exclusively done in the soft airbrush. So another layer, I'm really going to start getting some really dark areas in here. I'll stick with the blue, but a very dark version of it, and I want to just start to have areas here that kind of disappear into the background. There is actually going to be forms here, but it almost gives the impression that the cloud is just sort of fading off. But some of these areas will actually still contain some cloud formations, just very dark, almost like the complete colour of the background, but just a hint of forms as well. I'll probably do the same over here. So there might be just some areas where we just start to get some breakout forms eating into these areas. So this is going to be like the section that runs through the middle, and you're going to get a real dark area here. I'm going to do some stars over the top of it, so it almost appears like there's a gap in the cloud, but it may well be, having looked at these images, I think that they're actually further behind some of the stars. It's hard to get your head around really the idea of something, a form, a seeming apparent form that is actually behind any stars, but I think, having studied some of these images, that's what's going on. Although it tends to look like you're seeing through the cloud and then the stars are shining through, but I think in actual fact what you're seeing is stars that are in front of these forms. I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to do the exact opposite this time. I'm going to go to the real lighter colours. I'm going to start just giving some edges to some of these kind of wispier white bits. So they're not going to be in the centre this time, they're going to be more on the edges. Perhaps because they're not as dense, then the light can shine through them, so they really pick up on the surrounding starlight, I guess. I think that's what's happening really when I look at these kind of images, is the real dark concentrations, is a really dense cloud, if we can call it cloud. If anyone understands this kind of structure better than myself, please educate me, leave some comments so I can learn a bit more myself. I tend to just look at things visually and try and figure them out, but perhaps with the help of somebody who really knows kind of cosmic elements can actually tell me better what it is that I'm actually talking about. Some of these sort of sharper edges is something I could spend a long time on, really fiddling, zooming in and getting some of these details really refined. It's definitely the kind of thing that I really enjoy doing, but the kind of thing that I could easily spend 20-30 hours on as well, getting slightly obsessive with the kind of subtleties of edges and forms, highlights. But you know, I do like doing this kind of thing. It's not a chore when you're enjoying it, but I'm not sure I'm going to have time for this tutorial to take it to that degree anyway, not on camera. I don't have enough space on my current camera equipment to record every tiny detail that, or every hour of work that perhaps I would normally put into something like this. So I'm trying to give you a kind of a snapshot of what it is I like to do. Okay, I'm going to go back to the layer with the yellows. I'm really going to start perhaps just sharpening up some of these edges of yellow here as well. So as well as the actual edge that goes right around the outside, maybe there's some of the yellow that hits some of the bits as they come more inwards on the centre area as well. I'm going to go back to my dark layer and I'm just going to start, I'm going to go back to the red layer instead, use some of the really almost black red, and I'm just going to start filling in some of these areas as well. Seems to be you only get a sharp yellow kind of edge on forms that are quite distinct. Just going to go on to the top layer now. I feel like I just need to, using dark and light tones, just start to really sharpen up some edges. So whenever I see like a form like this, it seems to have a definite edge, I'm going to sharpen up some of the highlights of it, but also kind of go right up to that edge with a darker tone as well, to really exaggerate perhaps some of the edges that are here. So I'm just going to work across the whole kind of canvas now, doing something similar to that. So a contrast of not only the darkest tone, but then I might go to like the lighter tone as well, and really bring out some of those edges to just make them pop a little bit more. Just before I start adding some more, start picking out the stars again, I'm just going to use some of this brightest red. I feel like I want to just create a concentrated area here of quite vibrant red, so I'm going to turn the opacity down. I just want to start bringing in some of those really strong warm colours. Okay, so I'm going to create another layer, and this time I'm going to start creating some stars. So I'm going to create mainly blue stars. And what I'm going to begin with is with my blue colour, slightly more towards the green, quite a nice bright version of it. I'm actually going to use some of the stars that may already be in the scene, and I've already got it on soft brush, quite low, but I'm just going to start putting in some of the main stars that I want to be in there. This is just the first stage, but I just want to start getting their presence sort of felt more in the image. What I might choose to do is, if I know there's an area with a lot of light in it, I might skip the blue and go more for a really bright colour in this kind of area. So I'm just going to work around the canvas and create a series of blue stars on one layer. Okay, now I've created a few stars. I'm going to work with a much smaller brush and quite intense this time. I'm going to put points of light in the centre of each of those, and you might need to zoom in a little bit just to get a bit more precision, but I really want to start making those kind of look like some of the brightest sources on the image. I'm going to use a trick here like I did with the galaxy painting, just to show you that you don't need to paint every single star. Sometimes there are things that you can do, shortcuts if you like. Okay, I think that's all the ones that I've just added. We just double check the layer. Yep. So what I'm going to do with that layer, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to select that layer, and I'm going to do various things with it. So I can flip it, I can then change the scale of it. So I might want to just get a sense that there's more stars in this area now. I can use this technique to start to build up some of the stars that are actually going to be in front of the clouds. So again, with that layer now, I can duplicate that. Again, use the same technique. I can bring them into another area, maybe flip it again, and I can start to do more of this with each layer. Duplicate again, move it around. I want to merge some of these layers now, so which layer have I done the stars on? So the top three are smaller versions of that, so if I take those away, you can see, so I might duplicate that entire layer. Again, I can move those around now. I can reduce them in size again. Duplicate the layer again. Again, manipulate it, move it around, find another area. Keep doing this until you're happy with the number of stars and the overall effect. I'm going to go back to that first layer I made, and I'm going to start changing the look of those stars slightly. So I'm going to go to my blue. I'm going to create like a proper kind of, turn the opacity down, like as if the camera that's taking the picture is create a sort of camera flare almost, so you get a proper kind of starburst effect. So I've turned the opacity way down. So I don't want to do it for every single one, it would be a bit overkill. Just for maybe some of the biggest and brightest, which is why I'm doing it on the layer of the first stars, because they were some of the bigger forms, so they by right should have the biggest sort of starbursts. Again, if this was like one of my standard paintings, I would zoom in for this to get a bit more accuracy on the forms, but I'm just trying to create the effect for you. Let's just double check that layer. In fact, now I'm going to do the same as I did before, duplicate it, and I'm going to maybe just flip it. I want to double the number of those stars, but maybe move them to a different area. I think what I'm going to do with all my layers of stars is just condense them down by pinching them together. Try again. Do the same trick. So duplicate. Not only does it make them brighter, so I could just use it for that effect alone, but now I'm going to flip them again, flip them that way as well. Maybe reduce the size, have them more concentrated in maybe this area. Duplicate that layer, move it around. I feel like some of this blue is perhaps a little bit too strong. One of the things you can do once you're actually on that layer is to click on the N, and you can choose different effects. Better on the lighten, the darken doesn't really work well for this. If you click lighten, or screen is perhaps even better, or even add. I'm going to choose screen. It gets rid of some of the colour but keeps the brightness, which for this particular element in this area is exactly the kind of thing I want. So I want to create a bit of a concentration of stars in this area. So I'm just going to keep the duplicating it in that area. Maybe flip it. Well, just duplicate it again, flip it again, flip it that way maybe. So I'm really getting a bit of a concentration there now. I think I might duplicate it again. This time I'm going to move it to this area. It feels like it's a little bit lacking stars. So just use your judgment. You know, some areas may not need as many stars. Maybe you want certain areas to seem like they've got a brighter focus of them. Keep doing this until you're happy with the effect, really, until it's what you want. So again, I'm going to pinch some of these together. So all the ones with the S, I'm going to pinch those together, duplicate that effect. Again, flip it over, duplicate again, select it, flip it over. So now I can work on a layer that I've put underneath the stars, so I can add more brightness, but it's not going to any more obliterate those stars, so that's great. I'm going to go back to this bottom star layer, duplicate it, and then I'm going to change perhaps the colours on that one. So I'm going to the colour range and I can go to more like a warmer. So I'm going to turn the opacity up to a really kind of strong warm colour for one or two of those. Of course I need to move that away, so I'll flip it maybe. There you can see the effect now. There's too many of them, so with the eraser I'll just delete one or two. So they're not competing with the blue ones. I just want them a bit more sparing than that, really. So they're there, but they're not going to try and overtake. And I might just duplicate that layer and do another version, but maybe a smaller one. Maybe a cluster of the warm ones over there as well. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. I hope you've enjoyed watching me explore my own nebula creation. I've really enjoyed doing it. It's something that I could use different elements of it or the whole painting as part of another more complete piece later on. Please subscribe. I've got lots of other types of tutorials if you want to look through my playlist. And if you're interested to know how to support me, please look down in the description. There is a link to my Patreon page. Thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you back here again.